We really need to learn skills of reconnecting and loving people. You know, the transgender and gender confusion is a cry for help.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan joining you once again. And Aaron, I was all set to bust you down about your pumpkin spice obsession. And then I learned today that you are a man of principle and you're abstaining until after Labor Day.
That's exactly. Listen, man, all of us have a code that we live by. And I'm a man that lives by a code that loves all things pumpkin spice, all things pumpkin generally. I told my wife we were getting some things done around our house, and I said, "Oh, we're going all out for fall this year." She's like, "We literally do every year. What are you talking about?" Because we're a fall family. So, and yes, I hear it. Like I know there's all the insults about men who drink pumpkin spice lattes, but I will take all the insults.
Hard on the outside, soft on the inside.
You see that? And it is actually, it's funny. A former employee texted Nalani and said, "Are you guys still doing Pumpkin Spice Day?" And I was like, "Of course we're still doing Pumpkin Spice Day. This is a tradition around CCV.
It is like the CCV holiday.
It actually, and just for all of our donors out there, I pay for it personally. This is not coming out of CCV donor dollars. Buying 15 30 pumpkin spice lattes, whatever it is.
I'll be drinking water to represent all of us Christians.
Well, it's kind of funny. I'll share this real quick. When I was interviewing for the position, you and I met at a Starbucks around this time, and you asked the barista when Pumpkin Spice Day was. I distinctly remember that.
Exactly right. And you said, "I don't know if I'm going there." So, but you still came. So
I still came. I still made it. Well, as we turn our attention to real news, actual news today, not pumpkin spice news, we got some news late last week from Franklin County Common Pleas Court about a ruling on a blocked enforcement of the 24-hour waiting period for abortions. And this is one of those things that we talked about around issue 1 last year of the common sense restrictions that were in place were going to be subject to this kind of scrutiny and likely struck down because of how broad issue 1 is. And unfortunately, we did see that come to fruition last week.
Yeah, and I should say that the fight is far from over. We think we have more than enough reasonable ground to argue all the way up to the state Supreme Court that these laws are constitutional and need to remain. Again, this is one of these things that, our position on this is, okay, you, Planned Parenthood, ACLU, you guys ran all these ads telling voters to pass this thing. You called us liars for saying this was going to put all these informed consent provisions and all these things at risk. So now we're going to hold you to your word. You told the voters that this shouldn't be interpreted this way, that this was only going to allow, still gruesome, still terrible, but was only going to allow abortion until the child was viable. Basically, again, you guys all remember the ad saying this was going to reinstate Roe. Well, under Roe, women were allowed to have that 24-hour waiting period. States were allowed to have that 24-hour waiting period, and women were allowed to access these informed consent provisions, which were also blocked by the judge that said, these are informed consent provisions like, hey, you have other options besides abortion. Here's the support available to you. Here's the reality of the growth of the child in you. And again, Planned Parenthood and the ACLU in the campaign last year said these weren't going to be affected. And now obviously their positions changed. So this is incredibly frustrating. And I got more to say on all of that, but the reality is we're far from over here.
And just because you have a constitutional amendment about abortion doesn't mean that we don't have to be concerned about the safety of women, about concern informed consent. And this is some of the things that Yosh brought up even in his response to what was going on. And so when I see things like this, my first thing was like, I told you so. See there. But at the same time, we can't just give up, right? Because it is about the safety of women.
Right. I mean, this is, again, wrap your mind around this, what this would actually mean, right? These are same-day abortions, right, that you have happening here. And so we know abortion is a tool for human traffickers. We know it's a tool for predators. Honestly, we told stories during the campaign of adult men bringing minor women to abortion clinics and posing as their father, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that we're not going to have these protections in place so that, again, you go and you knock a girl up and then you destroy the evidence of it, right? And there is no opportunity for people to intervene in all of that. It is just a predator's dream to have these things taken away.
In a predatory industry.
Right.
Right. I mean, again, a lot of people think that women are going to their doctor, their family doctor. No, they're going to the McDonald's of healthcare. They don't know these people. They see them for a couple minutes. We need to watch those people, right? They need to have boundaries set on them as well.
And that's a great point, because it is the only people in the room now with that woman are the predator and the people that are profiting off of the abortion. Yeah. Right? Who literally talk about shouting your abortion. They think this is a good thing. I think about all of the undercover videos that people like Lila Rose and David Daleiden have done through the years, showing the way that these people operate. And again, this is already a community of women typically that show up in these clinics, or often, I should say, that show up in these clinics that are coerced, that are abused. So this is a major loss, not just for the state, but for women in particular. Obviously, we're still losing the life of a child in this situation too. So all of it is tragic. But as a important reminder, this case, as will the lawsuit that the teachers unions brought up against the voucher, as is the Safe Tack and Save Women's Sports lawsuit, all of these are going to end up at the Ohio Supreme Court, and control of that court is on the ballot and will be decided in November.
And specific to the 24-hour waiting period, a couple of things come to my mind, and that's the stat that we referenced last fall, which is upwards of 70% of women report feeling coerced into an abortion. And then you mentioned Lila Rose and some of the videos that Live Action has put out. There was one where they had somebody go undercover as a teenager with a story that sounded like abuse. And basically you have these clinic workers saying, well, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear you say that, so I don't have to report it.
Right, exactly.
And that's what we're talking about when we say the health and safety of women are on the line.
They're being exploited.
Exactly. I mean, again, coercion is central to the abortion industry's model, and people get offended by that, but that is the reality of what this is, right? The entire sexual culture that we have today is a coercive one by its nature. And so when you put women in these contexts and you make it so, profitable for aborting children, and incentivized and celebrated, it is too easy for people to look the other way or actually just be okay with it. And so, this is a really crazy decision. We think that, again, ultimately we have a shot at winning, but elections have consequences. And all I can think about is those 1/3 of, what David's talked about so many times from our Vital Signs report, the 1/3 of weekly attending churchgoers who voted yes on this amendment. This is on your heads, right? This is because you either didn't look into this enough, or you got swept up in the crazy messaging, whatever the reason was that folks voted for this.
You ignored the scriptures.
You wanted to be liked. You're sick. Again, how the strategy of the left on these things so much is just to wear us down, and ultimately just have folks say it's too messy, it's too complicated for me to get involved in. And that leads to situations like these. They're not going to relent, and neither can we.
Yeah, where we're the extreme ones if we talk about coercion or that type of thing, like it's a limitation on freedom. But another area that we're seeing that is in these stories coming out of schools and classrooms of kids being coerced to socially transition your gender. And CCV's got some stuff that we want to talk about regarding that. But David, I'm just curious from your perspective, like what have you heard or observed about these types of things going on in classrooms?
You pretty much have two categories, Mike. You've got the overt and the covert indoctrination of students in this area. And so a lot of times you'll have maybe assignments in the classroom actually from the teachers who are giving assignments, or maybe it's an extra credit if you go to this particular website and print off a page that you were there, you'll get some extra credit. And so they may have information on LGBT or transgender stuff that way. Sometimes it's a speaker that comes in. Sometimes it's a contractor. Maybe it's like a counselor that they're contracting with for mental health. In some of your fifth grade elementary schools, it's human development classes. And so that's where you get the drag queen story hours, which would be, the big headline, getting type stuff. And then sometimes it's the extra credit. So what we're trying to do is just collect instances of this happening all over the state. We get calls all the time. It's usually just one-off things that we try to help resource parents. But now we're just putting out an entire all call to the state of Ohio. If you see this happening, if you see your children being indoctrinated or coerced or encouraged to socially transition, let us know.
Yeah.
Right. Just as easy as clicking a button, filling out a quick description, and then we can pursue it further after that.
Yeah, and I think what's important about that, well, two things on that. One, just because you send us your story doesn't mean we're going to take it and run and put your name out there and do all that. The way this works is we'd follow up and have a conversation and see what folks are comfortable sharing. But two, we're coming up on a new General Assembly next year, right? And a new budget and all these types of things. And there's a wide variety of reasons why we want to be able to tell the stories of what's actually happening. I think when you look at the just realities of how the General Assembly operates, you have people who are really wanting to do the right thing, and it's up to us at CCV and really up to the churches in our network and the families in our network and things like that to bring those stories to us so that we can expose what's happening, right? And we get, we hear whispers, or a lot of times folks will call us directly, but as David said, now we want to really cast that wide net and say, hey, let us know what's happening, especially as we're coming back to school. I think for a lot of families, you talk to them in these situations and they know from the jump, okay, it's going to be one of these teachers, one of these kinds of years. And we want to make sure we have those stories to really help facilitate the change. We've been able to make a lot of change already, making everybody eligible for the voucher. We've gone from 16% of kids out of the public schools to 20% of the kids out of the public schools. We've made some really great progress, but more is needed, and the more we can have these stories, this is how we overcome, frankly, the left's massive financial political advantage.
And if you have a story to share right now, it's the lead story on our website, just ccv.org. If you happen to be listening to this episode a little bit later, you might need to go to ccv.org/share your story, all one word, ccv.org/share your story. And you can get us that information, and we'll be in touch if we want to use that in any way possible to help shine a light on these very dark areas where these coercive and exploitative behaviors are going on in the classroom. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we've got Joy Pullmann, who's an editor with the Federalist. She released a book this summer called False Flag: Why Queer Politics Mean the End of America. Promises to be a very interesting and very wide-ranging conversation, so I hope you'll stick around on The Narrative for that interview coming up next. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, joined now by Joy Pullmann, who's an executive editor of The Federalist, and she is a frequent commentator on such media outlets as Fox News, The Ben Shapiro Show, The Dennis Prager Show, Newsmax, and The Blaze. She's testified more than 24 times before state legislatures on education policy, but she's joining us today to talk about a book of hers that released this summer called False Flag: Why Queer Politics Mean the End of America. Joy, thanks so much for the time and joining us today on The Narrative.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is a really interesting book. I had the opportunity to skim through the first couple of chapters of it as we prepared to talk to you today. And I commented to Aaron earlier that as I was reading it, it wasn't necessarily new information, but seeing all of this kind of social Marxism, or what you call sexual Marxism, just laid out in a very dense way, just felt overwhelming, but also made a lot of sense of the current cultural moment in which we're living. So just tell us a little bit about the overview of the book and what prompted you to write it.
Well, I honestly wrote it for kind of two reasons. The first one is that the publisher asked me based on an essay I wrote for the Federalist last Pride Month. And the real reason that I kind of said, okay, fine, I'll do this, is because I think a lot of people are too scared to do it. And I am professionally in a position in which I can do it without, professional reprisal. I mean, there is some, sexual politics is seen as icky if you're not pro-feminist and pro-baby killing, so there absolutely are, outlets that really don't want to highlight it. They'll only go as far as women in sports, right? Not really talking about, the cuffing of arms and the other really horrific things kind of involved with the gender madness. So, but I thought, you know what? Unlike other people, I'm not trying to earn an anchor seat somewhere or whatever the case is. So I am, more free than other people would be to talk about the truth of this. And it does need to be said. People do need to have the courage, and my bosses won't fire me over it. So that's what started there. And I would say the book really kind of has two parts. So the first part that you probably have more familiarity with, as you notice, goes more over kind of the government argument. So it looks at, I argue that identity politics is affecting a regime change inside the United States. So it replaces our constitutional system of government and the ways of life that are required to uphold it with essentially, I struggle to find a word to describe it. I think totalitarian is maybe the best one. But because the idea is that there's nothing that is off limits from the state is embedded in there, but rejecting really the Constitution and I say ways of life, because our founders always said that the Constitution that they gave us, which I think probably created the best government in the world history, the best form of government available ever in human history. What a blessing for our country to be born in a country with that heritage. But they always said that enjoying and living under that kind of Constitution required a certain kind of people. They had to be moral, virtuous, basically faithful Christians. So they were all explicit about that. And if you don't have people for whom their private morality checks them in ways that the state cannot, then you have the state stepping into doing what previously families and private churches would be doing to provide accountability for their moral actions and substitutes for families. So we've already seen a lot of that happening. The state is basically the father for millions of American children. Even sometimes when there's a father in the home, the state basically acts as the father by being the major provider of all the provision for the children. So that's a completely different system of government than the one that it requires people to basically be responsible for themselves and for their own children and so forth. So I talk about that in the first section of the book, the regime change that's created when people really have unfettered sexual license against the traditional Christian morals that under which our country cannot exist. And the second way that I kind of approach this subject is you're kind of looking at its effects on our families and our social lives. So not just the government angle, but how is this really rebounding in people's daily lives? How it kind of what I talk about is I think there is a cycle of generational dysfunction that is previous to, but resulted in the transgender craze that we're going through now. So I link transgenderism to people's psychoses that are often created by earlier family dysfunction. If you look up, for example, I just noticed this as a reporter. I started every time I heard about a transgender person in the news, I would just kind of look them up and seek basic biological or biographical facts about them. And in every single case where I would find the information, there was always some trauma in that person's life. Major things we're talking about. Maybe had leukemia at age 4, was in and out of hospitals all the time. Parents divorce, very common one. That's a major trauma in kids' lives that we're forbidden from talking about. So it's very clear that, the gender identity dysfunction that so many young people are experiencing today, there's absolutely a mass like I'm trying to avoid the word hysteria. I mean to say there's been talking about it being kind of like a social craze. Social contagion is the phrase that I'm looking for. There's absolutely evidence that the saturation in media, and being in the internet age, so that little children, if you have a cell phone, you've seen transgender stuff, no matter how old you are, even if you're 6. So there's the social contagion aspect of that, but there's also the psychological contagion aspect there. And it's been taboo for all of these years to talk about the downstream effects of divorce on children, for people, children of divorce, like myself, to talk about the effects, that the difficulty that it creates for children when parents don't choose to make hard choices on behalf of their kids. And so I really think that even though transgenderism feels really sudden and surprising to a lot of people, the evidence and the likelihood that it would come up. It was kind of inevitable once you look at all the things that came before it.
So, Joy, you use a term, queer politics, right? And that could engender all kinds of feelings, depending on which side of the aisle you might be coming from, political persuasion. What do you mean by queer politics? What might be encompassed in that term?
Well, I like to use the word queer mainly because it's impossible to say LGBTQ and then there's always extra letters added at the end. At least we can say queer, and it encompasses everything. And people pretty much, know, it basically means non-heterosexual, but non-heterosexual is clunky. Queer is one syllable, it conveys what I'm going for. But the other reason that I use that is because I think there absolutely is an aspect of, I talk about this in the book. If the goal of the gender ideologues is to end heteronormativity, if you think about that just for a second, something that is normal is something that the majority of people do. We could just say a bare majority, 51%. So if you want something to stop being the norm, you mean you want the majority to no longer be heterosexual. So if you're going to end heteronormativity, you are recruiting sexual behaviors that are anything but heterosexual to be the majority of Americans.
It's weird politics is the other way of saying that. And again, I know that's like super offensive, but like if you want to dress up if a man wants to dress up as a woman and read books to kids, that's weird, right? I mean, this is one of these things we've talked about on the show multiple times, is that we shouldn't let them to almost what you're talking about normalize a lot of the things they're trying to push on kids, right? If you're saying kids are born in the wrong body, that is a weird and dangerous thing to say. And the more I think for a lot of Christians, and again, this is something we've really documented here over the years. For a lot of Christians, we've wanted to approach these topics with sensitivity and compassion and all that. And honestly, to a large degree, I think the left has exploited that in us to allow these things to go on. That's not saying that we should be violent or anything like that, but it is saying we should be honest and clear about what this is, and that's why I really like that term.
Thank you.
I did want to ask you, because we talked about this in the office a few weeks ago. About really where the how we got here with the queer politics that we're facing today, and I think one of the things that we didn't see coming, right? So CCV, and it was actually before my time, we led the marriage amendment campaign in Ohio back in 2004. My predecessor Phil Burris did that, and then when the Obergefell case came down in 2015, I think for a lot of us we talked a lot about how when you redefine marriage, it's going to really hurt the family and kids, right? Mm-hmm. I know, at least for me, when by the time Obergefell came down, I was working in this work, and for me, a lot of that thought was around the idea of it's just going to make marriage less valued. Where you're going to see more kids born out of wedlock, and it's just going to sort of tear down the way that we look at marriage generally. And I think to some degree that's right. But I think actually the bigger fallout of same-sex marriage was the broader idea that got us the transgender movement, which says that men and women are replaceable, right? That there is no
interchangeable.
They're interchangeable. There is no distinguishing realities between men and women, that two men and two women functionally do the same thing as a man and a woman. And you could see how actually that seed of a lie, that is what led us to this whole transgender movement. And
that actually was the thing that I forgot that I was going to come back to. I define queer as anyone who basically accepts the premise that men and women are interchangeable. So I do include in that feminism, and my book talks about feminism as the now it's accepted, right, to, be girl power. And even, people who code themselves on the right are all about girls sports and, girls being powerful and in charge. But imagine if people I mean, if they were just want to say, what if girls wanted to be nurturing and beautiful? And, if you start pulling out some feminine adjectives, and then people get really uncomfortable. And why is that, right? Why would we be attaching male adjectives to women, and everyone's pro that, but everyone's super uncomfortable when we attach female adjectives to women? So I think that's just one example of the kind of cultural context we're in which there's so much confusion about the differences between men and women, even though they're all right every single day in front of our faces.
Yeah, the thing that stood out to me on the title was not so much the queer terminology, but politics, queer politics. Because I think a lot of times we look at it as just one individual who might be struggling with their identity, or how they might dress, or what they might do to act out, however they define queer for their lives. But you put in this politics piece, which to me I think is an important piece to help us think more broadly that this is a movement, that there are people driving this. That this ideal that was not normal, right, and is being pushed to be normal by all different segments of society, including the medical, segment. There was just recently the American Society of Plastic Surgeons said that they would no longer endorse gender surgeries for children. And that's huge because they're the only major group. I think they represent over 90% of all the plastic surgeons in America. And they're saying, wait a minute, this is wrong, and we're not about it. That speaks to the political side, right? The pushback on the political side that I think is very important.
Right. And I also like to use that to say, queer individuals are not the enemy. Right. So it's about the political system that basically is using them as human shields to create a totalitarian system, replacing American government of the people, by the people, and for the people, for the benefit of the people.
And the attack on the family that comes as a result of all of this, the destabilization of the nuclear family, you really see the offshoots of that too in the policies that are being pushed here, because then it necessarily means, well, if you can have two dads, then they have to have a way to be able to have children. And then we see, these.
I don't know why that follows, but it does, of course.
Yeah,
I think the goal is to
that's the argument that's being
childbearing
made, not
from
that
biology.
it's actually
right.
logical. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's right. That's right. So, Joy, I want to actually zoom out a little bit and talk a little bit about the Federalist, because I feel like into what you kind of described about why you wrote this book, I feel like a lot of that is what I see from the Federalist too, right? In the media environment we're in today, that a lot of folks are afraid to touch certain subjects or to bring certain opinions to the table. Can you just tell us a little bit about, one, as an editor of the Federalist, sort of the mindset of the editors there, and what you guys are hoping to accomplish through the Federalist?
Oh, sure. I mean, so I'm the first person that the people who co-founded the Federalist hired when they started up 10 years ago, and I've stayed with them ever since. Love working there, love our team. It's been great. I mean, we have lots of hallmarks at the Federalist. I think chief among them is our aggression. Just you were talking earlier about weaponizing the goodwill of normal Americans. That is something that the left does all the time. And at the Federalist, we have honed our instincts to be just no nonsense, really not allowing that to be the case, and being the first people to jump on an issue when we know that it's right, and just not even give an inch on it, because we know that the average person in America is a decent person. They have compassion for other people. They want to hear all sides of the story. The sort of political binary that we're put into really doesn't explain all the many nuances between, that real people have when they're thinking about our tagline is politics, religion, or culture, right? There's a lot of overlap and nuance and little divots in actual real people's ideas about that. But the thing is that the left in this in this country has really transformed from being, I mean, I think you saw that with the recent news, about RFK Jr., his kind of transformation of his campaign. The Democrat Party, as he said, is no longer the party of the worker, the blue collar union guy, trying to earn a fair wage or get some benefits or not be working 7 days a week. That's kind of the mythos that the Democratic Party paid lip service to, and in some cases used to help the average American with, but they have long ago left that behind. So at the Federalist, what we try to do is give people courage to understand that they're dealing with completely different people on the left now, than even 20 years ago. And really, the Federalist was created by people on the right who were sick of the lack of dissent being allowed within the party, especially around the George W. Bush administration. There was, the internal firing squads against people, for example, who did not support No Child Left Behind, endless wars in Afghanistan with tenuous links, with intelligence that we now know was very corrupt, and often, will give people bits of information, not the whole story in order to accomplish the intel agency's broader geopolitical aims. And so the Federalist was really founded to be kind of an influence operation into Washington, D.C., for the voice of the American people, especially those on the right who were not covered even by, many media institutions that claim to be on the right. They don't even, like I said, the many of the things that you'll hear about pro-life, for example, very few outlets on the right even will get into is IVF moral, right? In a way that the entire Republican Party is almost completely capitulated on, not even making the argument about human life starting at conception or the million babies frozen. What do we do with them? Are their lives of any value? We'll go into that when a lot of publications won't. Some of our so because of that tenacity, we've covered better than other outlets. For example, we were one of the early outlets to even see the divisions in the party that maybe could cause a Trump to win in 2015, 2016, because we're close to the ground and the people. I had come out of covering Common Core, very close with the Tea Party movement, and had noticed how the Republican Party completely squashed constantly all of the energy and the activism from their people, rather than saying, wow, we love these people, we love this energy, this could be great electoral success for us, these people vote for us, let's give them something in return for that. It was just no, we'll obey the experts, etc. So, that was, I think the frustration that people felt was very clear, to me with the Republican Party. Hey, this would be a reason they might try a wild card like Donald Trump. And so we've just taken that attitude to everything else that we cover, from being the first outlet, for example, when the Brett Kavanaugh op was run, to say, yeah, he's a gang rapist and nobody's heard about it until now, and you can't even substantiate that. You're like, please give us some evidence. We were the first to go out there with that, and I don't really think we should have been. But so that's our general attitude and our coverage to the news, and it has served us really well, helping back people and confirm their instincts that, not only the left, but a lot of the leaders on the right don't have people's best interests at heart. And it's the job of the media to call them to account for that. Not something the media does very well, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah. Well, Joy, as we start to wrap up here, as thinking of the book in terms of, we're seeing this revolution in the country around these sexual politics and ideas. And those of us who want to maintain conservative values, family values, what's the path forward? How do we kind of stem the tide that's sweeping the nation?
Well, I have a chapter about that. Everybody has the obligatory "What do we do?" chapter. Mm-hmm. Because of my job looking at national politics, and for example, my history is in education reporting. So I just don't think things are going to turn around quickly. So the reason I mentioned the education reporting thing is because things weren't going well in this country for the next generation before we hit lockdowns. And now that, post-lockdown, the learning losses that will never be recovered are happening at the same time that generation is supposed to sustain the largest amount of government debt in world history, right? They're supposed to pay that off when they've been handicapped for life and their earning potential forever retarded. That's just, we have systemic major cultural problems. And then you add on top of that, those same kids are the ones, the highest amount of divorce and fatherlessness in any generation. The fewest number of Americans having kids, that's a measure of hopelessness and lack of willingness to sacrifice for the future. We have a lot of really, really negative major trends, and transgenderism is just one of them that I'm looking at. So I don't think, I think people want to hope, oh, this election will do it, that election will do it. I've been hearing that my entire life, and I absolutely believe people should get out and vote. but that is nowhere near enough to what needs to happen and the length of time that people should be hoping and praying and working for the good of their neighbors in this country. So in my chapter, I really think every individual needs to start with taking responsibility for himself. And so this book is really about relationships and people's psychological dysfunction that comes from alienation and loneliness, whether that's not having children, not getting married, not having brothers and sisters, not having a functioning family. We all have something like that in our lives, and we all have things that we need to recover from, get our heads straight on about, and say, even though this happened in my life, I'm going to be a mature whole person, and I'm still going to pursue relationships and be, and create a lifeboat that other people can come into, So I'm going to create a strong family, and I'm going to invite other people in who don't have that in their own home. I think that's really the first step, is self-leadership, self-reconstruction. It's very hard to be a mother, to be a father, and that can bring up things for people. That if you haven't had a good model for a mother or father, it's going to be extra difficult for you to do that, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And so I think people should really start with themselves in terms of that. And then I think we really need to learn skills of reconnecting and loving people. The transgender and gender confusion is a cry for help. If you have someone in your life who is like that, just learning how to befriend people and how to love on them so that they get genuine, friendship and love from a real local source that is in their lives, not coming through a screen, giving them lives. I think that's just the number one place that people need to start.
Well, Joy, thanks so much for this work that you've put into the book. If people want to pick it up, where can they find it? I know it was shadow banned on Amazon for a few weeks when it was released. Is it available there now and everywhere else?
It is available there, but it's still, sometimes if you search for my name in the book title, you still can't find it. But if you search for my name, just Joy Pullmann and the Federalist, you'll find my bio, and there's a link to it in my bio at the Federalist. So that's probably the most accurate way to go ahead and get a copy.
Great. Well, we look forward to our audience reading this, and hopefully they're encouraged by it and starts helping some pieces fall into place in their own minds. Joy Pullmann, thanks so much for joining in The Narrative today. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.